Hello, my friends. Tonight we sit together with something very familiar, yet often carried in silence: old pain and the anger that once passed through our lives. Not all of it is still clear, but sometimes, as night falls, it quietly returns, like a small wave touching the shore. Buddhism does not see pain as something that must be erased, and it does not treat anger as an enemy that needs to be defeated. It gently reminds us that the past by itself cannot hold on to us unless we continue to grip it tightly in the present. When the hand grows tired from holding on, there is no need to give an order to let go. It is enough to simply notice that you are tired. And in that very moment of easing the strain, the mind begins to feel lighter. The stories tonight are not here to explain or to conclude anything. They are simply here to sit beside you long enough so that what is being held may find its own way to quietly leave. Emily lay down on her bed after the room had been dark for a long time. The space was quiet enough, dark enough, safe enough for sleep. Yet inside her mind, an old sentence began to play again, slowly and clearly, as if someone were sitting right beside her, softly repeating every word. That sentence had been spoken many years ago, on an afternoon that once felt completely ordinary. Back then, Emily had stood still, not reacting, not saying anything in return. Time passed. Life changed. People changed. But that sentence never truly disappeared. It simply stayed somewhere inside her, waiting for the most exhausting nights to quietly return. Emily turned onto her side and pulled the blanket a little higher, as if she could cover the sound inside her mind. But the more she tried not to think about it, the clearer the sentence became. It no longer sounded like the voice of the person who once said it, but like Emily's own voice. She realized this very late. Each time the sentence returned, it wasn't the past speaking. It was the present repeating itself. And every time it happened, her chest tightened slightly, her shoulders grew a little stiff, her breath became shallow, even though nothing at all was happening in this quiet room. There were nights when Emily wondered how such a small sentence could stay for so long. She had thought she was already past it, had told the story calmly before, sometimes even with a faint smile. But her body never smiled. Her body remembered that moment with precision, and whenever the sentence appeared, her body reacted before any thought could fully form. Emily lay there, clearly feeling a tiredness that didn't only come from a long day, but from carrying something old inside her for far too long. Outside the window, the wind moved gently, not strong enough to stir the curtains, only enough to keep the space from feeling completely still. Emily listened to the soft sound of leaves brushing against one another, a sound that meant nothing, yet felt comforting. She noticed how the wind didn't try to retell yesterday, didn't carry traces of old winds with it. It simply passed through, touched lightly, and moved on. The thought brushed through Emily's mind without taking shape, without becoming words, just a fleeting feeling, before being covered again by that familiar sentence. She remembered the first night it returned, how her heart had raced as if it had just happened. And on the nights that followed, she became used to its presence, though not in a gentler way, only learning how to lie still and endure. At times, Emily believed that if she became strong enough, busy enough, forgetful enough, the sentence would disappear on its own. Yet the years passed, and whenever night came, it was still there, waiting for her to lie down, waiting for everything to fall silent. Emily let out a long breath, not to relax, but because her body simply needed more air. She stopped trying to push the sentence away and lay still, listening to it the way one listens to distant rain, without needing to respond. For the first time in many nights, she didn't argue with the memory, didn't ask why it was still there, didn't blame herself for not being able to release it. She simply allowed it to be present and watched to see what might happen next. In that moment, Emily noticed something very small. The sentence didn't return on its own. It was being called back, not by the person who once spoke it, but by the repeating inside her own mind. Each time she remembered it, retold it, asked why, she unknowingly placed it on the bed beside her. This realization didn't make her feel light right away, but it eased the tension slightly, as if a tightly knotted string had been loosened just enough to no longer hurt. Emily closed her eyes. The sentence was still there, but its volume had softened a little, not because she had defeated it, but because she was no longer gripping it so tightly. And in that fragile quiet, her body began to remember what rest feels like, even if only for a brief moment. Emily wasn't sure how long she had been lying there. She wasn't trying to sleep, and she wasn't trying to think. She was simply letting the night pass through her. The old sentence still surfaced from time to time, but it no longer felt sharp. It was more like a distant sound now, no longer pressed right against her ear. Her body, after so many nights of quiet tension, began to show very small signs of softening. Her shoulders sank lower, her jaw loosened, her breath, though not yet steady, grew a little deeper. Emily realized that all this time she hadn't only been remembering that sentence. She had been carrying it with her, keeping it close, like something important that needed protection. Not because it was precious, but because she was afraid that if she let it go, she would lose proof of having once been hurt. As if that pain were evidence that she had mattered, that she had been touched in a way that stayed. And because of that, she had allowed it to remain for far too long. Tonight, for the first time, Emily no longer felt the need to hold on to that proof. Not because she had forgiven, and not because she had understood everything, simply because she was tired. Tired of repeating, tired of listening to the same sentence for so many years. And in that very real tiredness, a small space appeared. Not large, not clear, but just enough that she didn't need to call the memory back again. Outside, the wind continued to move, steady and unhurried. Emily let the quiet settle over her, like a thin blanket. The sentence didn't disappear completely, but it was no longer at the center. It stepped back, making room for the feeling of lying still, without needing to defend herself. And in that fragile moment, when Emily was no longer trying to release and no longer trying to hold on, sleep arrived, light as permission. Perhaps what allows pain and anger to stay for so long is not that the memory itself is strong, but that the remembering happens so consistently. Each time we recall it, analyze it, ask about it again, we quietly allow old emotions to keep living in the present. Anger does not exist in the past. It exists in the moment we name it again. In the very body that is lying here, breathing here. Letting go is not a forceful act. It does not look like closing a door or erasing a memory. Letting go often begins with noticing that we are tired of holding on. When that tiredness is honest enough, the hand loosens on its own, without needing an order. Buddhism does not ask us to forget what hurt us. It only reminds us that a memory cannot enter the present unless we invite it in. Anger weakens, not when we defeat it, but when we stop feeding it through repetition. When we stop placing it on the bed with us each night. When we allow the body to rest, even if the story in the mind has not fully ended. And in that rest, the mind begins to feel lighter. Not because the past has changed, but because the present no longer has to carry anything extra. You don't need to let go tonight. It's enough to notice that some things stay, not because they are needed, but because they are familiar. And sometimes simply not calling them by name one more time is already enough for the mind to soften into sleep very gently. Brother Theo once believed that he had already let go, at least in his thoughts. He could tell the old story without his voice trembling, could remember the days of anger without blaming anyone anymore. In his mind, everything felt neatly arranged, reasonable, with causes and conclusions in place. But his body did not follow those understandings. Each time the old memory appeared, even briefly, his shoulders still tightened, his back grew slightly stiff, and his breath shortened without him even noticing. Night in the monastery was very quiet. There were few sounds, only distant insects and the wind passing through low branches. Brother Theo sat still on a thin cushion, his hands resting lightly on his thighs. He was not trying to meditate deeply, nor was he searching for anything special. He was simply sitting, as he had on many nights before. But tonight, when an old memory drifted through, his body reacted before his mind could recognize it. His shoulders lifted slightly, his neck tightened, his chest closed in, as if preparing for something that no longer needed to happen. Brother Theo noticed that he had become so used to this tension that he no longer paid attention to it. It no longer hurt. It simply existed, like part of his posture, like someone who had worn armor for too long and forgotten the feeling of skin underneath. He had once believed that understanding the old story, that forgiving through reason, would naturally allow the body to release as well. But it seemed that the body could not read those explanations. The body only remembered what it learned in the very first moment of tension. He breathed in, not more deeply than usual, just enough to notice where the breath was. As he breathed out, his shoulders did not yet fall, not because he failed, but because the body had not yet learned that it was safe. Brother Theo did not force it. He remembered an old teaching, very simple. The body needs time to understand that danger has passed, not through words, but through gentle and steady presence. In that quiet space, he clearly saw something he had never fully faced before. Each time the old memory returned, even without anger, he was still unconsciously preparing for a conversation that had ended long ago. His body remained in the same position, as if the argument were not yet finished. And it was this preparation that kept anger alive, not in the mind, but in the muscles themselves. Brother Theo brought his attention to his hands. His fingers were lightly curled, not clenched, but not truly open either. He did not tell them to release. He simply noticed that they were holding, just noticing, without judgment. In that noticing, there was a very small pause. And within that pause, his fingers softened slightly, almost impossible to see, but enough for him to feel. He sat like that, not counting time. The old memory still came, but each time it did, he did not rush to understand it or to release it. He simply observed how the body responded. The shoulders lifted, then settled more slowly. The breath shortened, then lengthened a little. There was no moment of sudden clarity, no clear sense of liberation, only the gentle repetition of staying with the body until the body no longer needed to brace itself. Brother Theo realized that there are things the mind has already passed through, while the body is still standing behind. And without turning back to meet the body, letting go remains only a beautiful idea. The night stayed very quiet. The wind continued to move. And within that stillness, for the first time in many years, he felt that his body no longer needed to watch for anything, even if only for a few brief breaths. Brother Theo remained seated, without adjusting his posture, without trying to do anything the right way. He allowed the body to speak in its own language. His shoulders no longer lifted each time a memory passed through, not because the memory disappeared, but because the body had stopped reacting as if it were still happening. His breath settled lower, gently touching the belly, before moving out slowly, without guidance. He suddenly realized that for many years he had used understanding to move ahead of the body. The mind had learned how to organize everything neatly, but the body had never been given enough time to stay and learn that everything was over. The body only knew how to tighten when danger appeared, and it would not open on its own without a very gentle patience accompanying it. Tonight, Brother Theo did not rush to pull the body along with the mind. He sat there like a quiet companion, allowing the body to move at its own slower pace. There was a very small moment, almost unnoticeable, when his shoulders dropped completely, not collapsing, but returning to their natural place. His neck softened, his jaw released. He did not name this moment or cling to it. He simply noticed that the body trusted the safety of the present a little more. Outside, the wind continued to pass through the trees, leaving no trace behind. Brother Theo let that image drift through his mind and then drift away. No need to hold it. No need to remember it. His body was no longer preparing for an old conversation. It was here, simple and complete. And within that completeness, he felt a kind of rest, deeper than sleep itself. The rest that comes from no longer needing to stay on guard. He gently leaned down and lay on his side on the thin cushion. There was no clear boundary between meditation and sleep, only a soft current where the body was allowed to sink into gravity without explanation. The old memory did not vanish completely, but it no longer had anywhere to attach itself. And in that softness, Brother Theo allowed the night to do the rest. Letting go of anger is not only an action of the mind, but a very slow process of the body. There are things we have understood, accepted, and retold with calm voices, while the body still holds on to old reflexes, not because we are lacking, but because the body learns at a different rhythm than the mind. The body needs to remain in safety long enough to trust that it no longer has to brace itself. Buddhism does not rush the body to follow thought. It gently invites us to return, to listen to where the body is holding on, and to stay there with kindness. Letting go does not happen when we command the shoulders to soften or the breath to deepen. It begins when we notice the tension and do not blame it. When we allow the body to be slow, even if the mind has already gone far ahead. Anger then does not live only in memory, but settles in very specific places: the shoulders, the chest, the jaw, the hands. And when those places are allowed to rest, anger loses its place to stay. No need to win, no need to erase, only no longer holding on through quiet tension. Tonight, you don't need to let go of everything. It's enough to notice where your body is bracing, and if you'd like, very gently allow that place to soften just a little. That alone is already the beginning of lightness. Master Rowan often sat alone very late at night, when the monastery had fully settled into silence. He didn't choose those hours because there was anything special to do, but because they were the moments when nothing demanded a response from him. No questions, no expectations, only the night, wide and gentle, spacious enough for old stories to settle on their own. if they wished. Once, during a very short talk with a few young disciples, Master Rowan shared a simple story about a man holding a burning piece of charcoal in his hand. The man gripped it tightly, intending to throw it at someone else to repay an old hurt. But the longer he waited for the right moment to throw it, the more his own hand burned, skin blistering and aching, while the other person had not been touched at all. The story was told softly, without explanation. After that, Master Rowan fell silent, as if the story itself was already enough. Tonight, sitting alone, he remembered that story again, not to teach, but to listen to it one more time at a deeper level. He saw clearly that most people do not hold on to anger because they want to hurt someone else right away. They hold it because they are not yet ready to release it, because they fear that letting go too soon would make their past pain meaningless. And so the hand keeps holding even when it is tired, even when it is burning. Master Rowan placed his hands gently on his thighs. His hands were old now, fingers no longer straight, skin softly wrinkled by time. He imagined that if he were holding a burning coal, the first thing he would feel would not be the desire to strike back, but the very real heat against the skin. Anger, when it is held, does not live in the story, but in this sensation itself. Hot, tight, and constantly asking for attention. Many people had come to him carrying long stories about how they had been hurt, how unfairly they had been treated. Yet as they sat before him, Master Rowan often heard less of the story than he saw of what their bodies were holding. Shoulders lifted, jaws clenched, hands lightly curled, as if gripping something they could not yet put down. And each time he knew that what exhausted them most was not another person, but the fact that they were still holding that burning coal in their own hands. The night wind passed gently across the monastery corridor. Not strong, just enough to keep the air softly moving. Master Rowan noticed how the wind did not need to decide whether to stay or go. It arrived when conditions allowed, and left when there was nothing holding it back. It carried no old storms and kept no trace of past cold. The thought did not become a teaching, only a quiet comparison, and then it faded. He remembered the first time he himself recognized anger in his hands. Not in his mind, but in his body. It was when he was young, when a long misunderstanding led him to cling tightly to the feeling of being wronged for many years. At the time, he believed he was holding his ground, holding on to what was right. But his body grew increasingly stiff, his sleep increasingly shallow. Only when he became too tired to hold any longer did his hand finally loosen, not because he decided to let go, but because the body was simply exhausted. Master Rowan sat very still. He did not think about teaching anyone to release anger. He only noticed the feeling of having nothing in his hands. A very light emptiness, where the hands did not need to grip, did not need to prepare, did not need to wait. That emptiness brought no sense of victory, but it carried a real coolness, a gentle relief. In that quiet, he understood that no one needs to be convinced to release anger. They only need to become tired enough of holding it. And when that tiredness is allowed to appear, the hand will naturally find its way to rest. The night continued to move slowly, and Master Rowan allowed the story of the burning coal to remain somewhere nearby, not as a warning, but as an image, gentle enough that one night someone might quietly realize their hand has been hot for far too long. Master Rowan remained seated without changing his posture. His hands rested quietly on his thighs, gently open, as if they had grown accustomed to holding nothing at all. He noticed that when the hand is no longer holding the coal, it doesn't need to do anything else. There is nothing to prove, nothing to wait for. It simply rests there, empty and cool. This feeling was very different from intentional letting go. It felt more like a quiet stopping of holding rather than a clear decision. He remembered the faces that had once sat before him, speaking about their anger in steady voices, as if the story were already old. But their bodies were not old. Their bodies were still standing in the very first moment of hurt. Hands clenched, shoulders lifted, ready to throw at any moment. Master Rowan had never told anyone they must let go. He only sat with them long enough for them to notice how hot their own hands had become. Tonight, in the deep stillness, he clearly felt the coolness spreading from his palms up his arms and into his chest. It was not a strong sensation, only the absence of tension. He understood that anger does not need to be explained in order to leave. It only needs to no longer be held. When no hand is gripping it, the burning coal fades on its own. Without wind, without water. The wind outside the corridor shifted direction very slightly. Master Rowan allowed the change to happen without following it. He was no longer concerned with how the story of holding the burning coal might be understood. Perhaps someone would remember it on a tired night. Perhaps not. That did not matter. What mattered was this moment when there was nothing in his hands, nothing to throw, and no one who needed to be hurt. He gently leaned back, his spine touching the cool wooden floor. His hands remained open. There was no sense of victory in that posture, only rest. And in that rest, the night continued to do its work quietly, without asking for anything. Olivia remained lying there, without changing her position. The room was dark enough that nothing needed to be clearly seen, yet safe enough that she did not need to open her eyes. The old argument still surfaced from time to time, but it was no longer continuous. The lines fell apart, no longer joining into a complete dialogue. Like a play that has lost its audience, where the actors remain on stage but the lights have softened. She realized that all this time, what kept the argument alive was not the other person, but her own continuation of it. Each repetition had given it another breath, not because she wanted to stay angry, but because she did not know how to stop when no one was facing her anymore. Tonight, for the first time, Olivia did not step into the role of the one arguing back. She was simply someone lying there, listening to an old sound pass through. Her body responded very slowly. Her shoulders no longer lifted each time a line appeared. Her jaw released. Her chest no longer tightened as if preparing to explain. These changes were very small, almost unnoticeable, yet enough for Olivia to feel that she was no longer in the middle of the argument, but standing outside it, watching it move past. She suddenly noticed something very quiet. The argument had ended long ago. Only the habit of continuing it had not. And a habit, when it is no longer fed, will naturally fade, without needing to be ended by a forceful decision. Outside, the wind gently stirred the curtain. The sound carried no meaning, yet it was enough to fill the space where the dialogue once lived. Olivia allowed that space to remain without filling it with new thoughts. She did not need to be right. She did not need to be understood. She only needed rest. In that fragile stillness, Olivia felt a kind of lightness she had never known before. Not because she had won the argument, but because she was no longer taking part in it. And when there was no one speaking, no one responding, the night naturally grew wider. Wide enough for sleep to find her. There are some forms of anger that do not need the other person to survive. They continue through repetition in the mind, through one-sided conversations that stretch from night to night. When the other person has already left, the anger does not disappear. It simply changes location, moving from the outside to the inside. And we become both the one who holds it and the one who bears it. Buddhism does not require us to neatly close every story. It only reminds us that not every conversation needs to continue. Some things have already ended in life, leaving only the habit of holding them in the mind. When that habit is gently seen, it begins to weaken. Letting go in this case is not about forgiving someone else, and it is not about denying what happened. It is about no longer playing both roles in an argument that no longer has anyone on the other side. When we stop responding, the question falls away. When we stop defending, the accusation loses its voice. Tonight, if an old conversation returns, you do not need to finish it. Simply do not continue it. And in that not continuing, the mind can settle again. very softly, like a room where the lights have finally been turned off. Jonas had worked with wood for many years. He was familiar with the scent of old timber, with imperfect grain, with small cracks that appeared after the wood had passed through many seasons. That evening, the workshop was quieter than usual. Yellow light settled onto the floor, bright enough to see, but never harsh. Jonas held an old piece of wood in his hands, its surface uneven, a thin crack running along the grain, not deep, but enough that many people would choose to set it aside. He placed the wood on the table and turned it slowly, as if listening for something inside. The crack reminded him of something old, not very clear, just a lingering sense of having been hurt that he had carried for a long time. It no longer stung, no longer stirred anger when he thought of it, but it was still there, like the crack in the wood, enough to make him hesitate each time he touched it. There was a time when Jonas was very strict with imperfect wood. He believed that to make something beautiful, the material had to be whole. Cracked pieces were often pushed into a corner, waiting to be thrown away or used for something minor. He had once done the same with his own memories. Whatever hurt him, he tried to remove, to store away, to never use. But the more he avoided them, the more present they became, like forgotten pieces of wood still lying there, taking up space in the workshop. Jonas placed his hand over the crack. The wood was not sharp, only slightly rough. He realized that the crack did not make the wood weak right away. It only showed that the wood had gone through many changes. Sun, rain, time. Much like the things in his own life, they were not useless because they had caused pain. Perhaps he simply had not known where to place them yet. He remembered an afternoon long ago when an offhand remark left him quietly angry. There was no big argument, no clear ending. Yet from that day on, whenever he remembered it, something inside him tightened just slightly. Not enough to call it anger, but enough to make him avoid touching it. Jonas believed that if he didn't think about it, the feeling would disappear on its own. But like the piece of wood pushed into the corner of the shop, it remained there, waiting to be seen again. Tonight, Jonas did not rush to decide. He did not pick up the wood to fix the crack, nor did he set it aside. He simply held it, feeling its weight, its temperature, its quiet presence. There was something in that silence that made him no longer want to reject the crack. He began to imagine using this piece of wood for a hidden part of a new shelf, a place where the crack did not need to be concealed and did not need to be displayed. The thought arrived gently, not as a moral decision, just a different way of seeing. Not everything that once hurt us needs to be erased. Some things only need to be placed correctly, where they no longer control the entire structure. Jonas set the wood down, but not in the corner as before. He placed it near the work table, close enough not to be forgotten, far enough not to be in the way. The gesture was small, yet it carried a sense of ease, like no longer needing to hold too tightly and not needing to throw anything away. Outside, the night moved slowly. Jonas turned off most of the lights, leaving only a dim glow. He did not think much about the old story anymore, not because it had been resolved, but because it was no longer at the center. And in that quiet, he realized that some cracks do not need to heal for life to continue. They only need to no longer be placed in the wrong place. Jonas returned to the workshop on another evening when the air felt gentler. He pulled the old piece of wood closer to the table and placed it beside other pieces waiting to be used. The yellow light fell across the crack, neither highlighting it nor hiding it, just enough to show that it was there, as a natural part of the wood. Jonas didn't try to fix it. He simply measured, cut, and set the piece into the place he had already imagined, a hidden corner of the shelf where it could support without needing to be seen. As the shelf slowly took shape, Jonas noticed a quiet shift inside himself as well. The crack hadn't disappeared, but it no longer caused him to hesitate each time his hand touched it. He found himself working more slowly, more evenly, as if he no longer needed to stay on guard. From time to time, the old memory drifted through, without sharpness, without demand. It was there, and then it passed, like the scent of wood lingering after a long day of work. Jonas set the shelf into its place. Stepping back a few paces, he saw that the whole structure felt steady. Nothing collapsed because of a small crack. If anything, the shelf carried the feeling of having lived through time, solid enough to remain. Jonas touched the surface lightly, then let his hand fall away. No need to hold, no need to check again. Night deepened. The workshop grew quiet, with only the soft sound of wind outside the doorway. Jonas turned off the lights, leaving behind a gentle darkness. He realized that he no longer needed to avoid the old memory, not because it had healed, but because it had found its place. And when something has a place, it stops intruding where it isn't needed. Jonas left the workshop and closed the door softly. In his slow steps, there was an ordinary kind of lightness. Lightness from not needing to erase, not needing to repair, only to set things back where they belonged. And the night as always continued on. Not everything that once hurt us needs to be removed. Some cracks do not ask to be healed, only not to stand at the center of everything. When we try to erase them completely, we quietly give them too much power. But when we place them where they belong, in a hidden corner, as part of what supports us, they stop controlling the entire structure of our lives. Buddhism does not ask us to become whole by some perfect standard. It gently reminds us that life is steady enough when each part is in its proper place. Old pain, when it is neither hidden nor displayed, can become something very ordinary, needing no explanation and no defense. Letting go in this case is not about removing memory, but about no longer allowing it to decide everything. When pain is no longer placed in the position of control, it naturally steps back. And when it steps back, there is more space to live, to rest, to place something new on our own shelf. Tonight, if you notice an old crack causing hesitation, you don't need to fix it. Simply place it where it belongs. Sometimes that alone is enough for the mind to soften very gently and for sleep to arrive. Sister Arya sat down on her cushion as night fully settled over the small garden behind the monastery. The space was quiet enough to hear distant insects, dark enough that the shapes of things no longer demanded attention. She did not set an intention to meditate deeply or to reach any particular state. She simply sat, as she had many times before, giving body and mind a chance to be in the same place. As soon as she closed her eyes, an uncomfortable memory appeared, not clearly as an image, but as a familiar sensation, a slight heaviness in the chest, a tightness in the throat. Sister Arya had met it many times in past sittings. Sometimes she tried to move her attention elsewhere. Sometimes she breathed more deeply, as if she could make it fade more quickly. But tonight, she did nothing at all. She simply noticed that it had arrived. She became aware of her first reflex, the urge to adjust, to sit straighter, to breathe deeper, to do it correctly. Seeing this, Sister Arya did not judge herself. She let her hands rest gently on her thighs and allowed her shoulders to fall back into their natural place. Her breath moved in an ordinary way, no longer, no shorter. The memory remained unchanged by the quiet. For a long time, Sister Arya had believed that meditation was a place where the mind should become calm. And so whenever an uncomfortable memory appeared, she took it as a sign that she was doing something wrong. She had tried to rise above it, to pass beyond it, as if there were a layer of stillness somewhere above everything else. But the more she tried, the more tightly the memory clung, like a child left waiting outside a closed door. Tonight, she searched for no such layer. She stayed exactly where she was. The memory was not named, and it was not pushed away. It hovered like a low cloud, not dark, not bright, just heavy. Sister Arya noticed that when she did not resist, the heaviness did not spread. It stayed in one place, with its own boundary, its own rhythm. Her breath brushed gently against the tightness in her chest, not to dissolve it, only to notice that the breath could still pass through. This surprised her softly. The discomfort did not block the breath. It simply stood there, like an old object in a room that did not need to be cleared away immediately. Sister Arya remembered a short teaching from a teacher many years ago. Do not use meditation to escape. At the time, she had not understood. Now, in this very real quiet, she began to feel what it meant. Running from memory was another form of tension. Staying with it, without resistance, was far gentler. Time moved slowly. There was no moment of awakening, only small waves moving through the body. The memory came, paused, softened slightly, without any clear order. Sister Arya did not follow the process. She simply sat, allowing everything to move on its own, within a space of permission. At one point, a thought appeared. I should be calmer than this. She noticed the thought and let it drift away, without arguing, without correcting it. The thought passed like wind, and the body remained. This made her feel lighter, not because of calm, but because she did not need to be different. When she opened her eyes, the garden was still dark. There was no sign that the sitting had been a success. Yet in Sister Arya's body, there was a very small softness, as if a knot had been loosened without being untied. The uncomfortable memory might return another time. She knew that. But tonight, she had sat with it, neither pushing it away, nor holding on. And that for now was enough. Sister Arya remained seated for a little while longer, even though the sitting had ended in the usual way, not because there was anything left to do, but because she did not feel the need to stand up right away. The uncomfortable memory had softened slightly, not disappearing, only moving farther back, like an object placed on the floor instead of hanging in the air. Her body responded very quietly. Her shoulders were no longer braced. Her belly felt softer. Her breath, without being instructed, naturally returned to a slower rhythm. She noticed that throughout the entire sitting, there had been no moment when she tried to process the memory. She did not understand it more deeply. She did not explain it. She did not draw a conclusion. And because of that, the memory had nothing to cling to. It arrived, was not resisted, and was not invited to stay. In that gentle neutrality, it gradually lost strength, like a sound that is no longer being amplified. Sister Arya opened her eyes. Thin moonlight rested on the leaves in the garden, not making them glow, only enough to reveal their shapes. She looked at the scene without adding any thought. There was a quiet peace in not needing to name what had just happened, not calling it success, not calling it progress, simply a night that had passed, carrying everything it came with. She stood up slowly. As she walked, Sister Arya noticed that her body no longer carried the same heaviness she had felt when she first sat down. Not because the memory had been healed, but because it had not been pushed away. When it was not pushed, it did not need to resist. And without resistance, the body naturally found a small sense of balance. Before leaving the garden, Sister Arya paused for a moment, not to remember a lesson, but to feel how the night was holding everything, without separating what was pleasant from what was uncomfortable, without choosing, simply holding. In that moment, she understood that meditation is not a place to escape from what is difficult, but a space wide enough that difficulty no longer takes up everything. She left in silence. The uncomfortable memory might return another day, but tonight it had been allowed to sit with her without being chased away. And in being allowed, it had found its own way to soften. There are forms of anger and pain that do not weaken because we fight them, but because we stop seeing them as enemies. When we try to push memory out of meditation, out of the mind, we unknowingly give it a powerful role. But when we allow it to appear without adding commentary or action, it no longer needs to speak so loudly. Buddhism does not teach meditation as a way to create a perfect state of calm. Meditation simply opens a space wide enough for things to come and go without being held. Uncomfortable memories, when they are neither pushed away nor held on to, begin to lose the weight that comes from resistance. Letting go in this case is not about making memory disappear. It is about stopping the effort to oppose it. When there is no longer an opposing force, emotions naturally find their place of rest. No need to understand why. No need to resolve everything. Tonight, if, while resting, an uncomfortable memory returns, you do not need to make it calm. Simply allow it to sit there with you a little longer. Sometimes it is this very absence of pushing away that allows the mind to feel safe enough to drift into sleep. Very gently. Grace lived at the edge of a small village where the dirt road slowly lost the marks of passing feet. Her garden was not large, but it was always full of low plants, small leaves, and gentle scents. On some afternoons, when the sunlight softened, Grace would squat beside the herb beds, touching each leaf with her hands, more as a familiar habit than as work. She never hurried. These plants did not need to be rushed. They grew according to their own rhythm. Among the herbs Grace cultivated, some were very bitter, so bitter that tasting them directly would make most people wince. But Grace did not avoid them. She tended to them with the same care as the others, because she knew that the bitterness itself carried a slow and deep kind of healing. Not for daily drinking, not in large amounts, only at the right time, in the right measure, and then set aside. One evening, Grace prepared a small pot of water for a visitor. The person spoke about old pain, about memories that made the heart feel heavy whenever they returned. Grace listened without asking questions and without offering advice. She simply chose a few leaves, including one that was very bitter, and placed them into the pot. Hot water was poured over them, and a light fragrance spread, not sharp, not overwhelming. When she handed the cup to the visitor, Grace spoke very softly, saying that a few sips were enough. There was no need to finish it. The visitor winced when the bitterness touched the tongue, but it was not unbearable. The bitterness arrived quickly, then faded, leaving behind a faint cooling sensation in the throat. Grace sat there observing quietly, making no comment. She knew that herbs do not work through words. After the visitor left, Grace tidied the garden in the dim light. She thought about that bitterness and about the way people often hold on to their pain. Many believe that if they do not keep the feeling of pain, they will forget the lesson. Like fearing that letting go of bitterness will cause the illness to return. But Grace had seen the opposite many times. When taken in excess, bitterness no longer heals. It only exhausts the one who consumes it. She bent down and picked up a fallen leaf. That leaf had once been green, once full of moisture, and then, in its time, it had let go. Nothing was wrong in that process. Grace realized that pain is the same. It has its season. There are times when it needs to be touched to be understood, but it does not need to be kept on the tongue day after day. Night settled deeper. Grace poured herself a cup of warm water, without herbs, just water. She sat quietly and allowed the warmth to spread. Within her, too, were memories that had once been very bitter. She had believed that she needed to hold them tightly so as not to repeat old mistakes. But over the years, she learned another way. Touch when needed, then set it down. In the stillness of the garden, Grace felt clearly that bitterness is not an enemy, but it also does not need to become a habit. Herbs heal only when used at the right moment. Pain is the same. When held for too long, it stops healing and begins to weigh us down. She stood and watered the low plants, including the bitter ones, without distinction and without preference. Each plant had its place, but no plant was meant for every day. The thought arrived gently, not as a teaching, but as a quiet understanding settling in, like night dew covering the garden. Grace turned off the light. The scent of herbs lingered in the air, neither strong nor faint. She did not carry bitterness into her sleep, only warmth, enough for the night to continue, kind and slow. Grace returned to the garden on another evening, when a thin layer of dew had begun to settle on the ground. She walked slowly, careful not to disturb the leaves still holding moisture. The herbs stood quietly in the darkness, needing no attention. Grace paused before the bitter plants and reached out to touch them very lightly, like a familiar greeting. She did not harvest. She did not inspect. She simply touched, then withdrew her hand. She remembered times when she had taken bitterness in greater amounts than needed. Back then, she believed that if she took enough for long enough, the body would never forget how to heal itself. But what happened was different. Her body grew tired, her stomach weakened, and the bitterness, instead of helping, became a burden. Only when she stopped and allowed the body to rest did balance return on its own. Grace looked over the garden under the pale moonlight. She realized that pain follows a rhythm much like herbs do. It carries a lesson, but it is not meant to stay on the tongue forever. Once the lesson has been absorbed, what remains is only unnecessary bitterness. And the body, like the mind, knows when it has had enough. If we are willing to listen. She went back inside and poured herself a cup of warm water. with nothing added. The water had no taste, yet it felt comforting. Grace sat quietly and felt the warmth spread very slowly. In that stillness, old memories that once carried bitterness no longer stood out. They were not pushed away. They were simply no longer called by name. And when they were no longer named, they naturally stepped back, making room for rest. Before going to bed, Grace opened the window. Cool air flowed in, carrying the scent of soil and leaves. She did not carry bitterness into her sleep, not because she feared it, but because she did not need it right now. The night was gentle enough to hold everything in balance, and she allowed the night to do its work. Not every pain needs to be held on to as a reminder. Some lessons have already been learned, yet we continue to taste the bitterness out of habit. When that happens, pain stops serving a healing purpose and begins to exhaust us each time we touch it. Buddhism does not deny the value of suffering, but it does not encourage us to carry it at all times either. Like bitter herbs, pain only needs to be used at the right moment and in the right measure. When enough has been taken, setting it down is not forgetting, but respecting the natural rhythm of body and mind. Letting go in this case is not about rejecting the lesson. It is about no longer tasting bitterness when the body no longer needs it. When we allow ourselves to drink clear water without flavor, the mind begins to realize that gentleness too can nourish very deeply. Tonight, if you notice that you are holding on to pain as a habit, you do not need to throw it away. Simply ask yourself whether you have already taken enough. And if you have, you may gently set the cup down, allowing sleep to arrive without carrying the old bitterness with you. Grandpa Ellis often woke up very early, not because there was much left to do, but because sleep had grown lighter with the years. Before the sky was fully bright, he would already be sitting by the window, looking out at the small yard in front of the house, where everything seemed to remain still for a long while before a new day began. At his age, he was no longer in a hurry. Time was no longer something he needed to chase. There was someone in Grandpa Ellis' memory whom he had been angry with for a very long time. So long that when the name surfaced, he could no longer clearly recall the person's face. Only the heavy feeling that arose each time the name passed through his mind. That person had hurt him far back in the past, when he was still young enough to believe that anger would help him stand his ground. Back then, he thought that if he held on tightly enough to his anger, he would never be treated that way again. But the years passed, and that person had left his life long ago. No more meetings, no more words, no more chances to hurt him again. Only the anger remained. It was not loud. It did not explode. It simply rested there, like a weight placed in his chest, forcing each breath to take a small detour. Grandpa Ellis had told that story many times, his voice steady, no longer sharp. People listening were sometimes surprised by how calm he sounded. But his body was not as calm. Each time he repeated it, his shoulders drew inward slightly, his back curved a little more, as if he were carrying something unnecessary. He noticed this one very quiet morning when he stood up from his chair and felt tired, even though he had done nothing at all. He sat back down and breathed out slowly. That anger was no longer protecting anything. It was no longer teaching him anything new. It was simply there, like an old habit he had never questioned. Grandpa Ellis suddenly understood that he was no longer holding on to anger because of that person. He was holding it because he had grown used to carrying it. Outside, a bird landed briefly on the fence and then flew away. He watched it, and in that moment, he noticed the difference between himself and the bird. The bird did not carry yesterday's morning with it. It arrived and left without keeping anything. And he, for so many years, had been carrying one heavy afternoon from the past into every new morning. Grandpa Ellis placed a hand over his chest, not to soothe, only to feel. The heaviness was still there, but he did not try to push it away. He was too tired to keep fighting something that no longer had an opponent. That anger had nowhere to go. The other person was long gone, and he was still here, carrying a task that had expired a long time ago. He smiled very faintly, not with joy, and not with sadness, but with recognition. A recognition that he had been punishing himself for far too long, over something that was no longer happening. No one was asking him to keep holding on to that anger anymore. No one was waiting for him to prove anything. There was only his body, growing more tired with each year, needing rest more than justification. Grandpa Ellis sat quietly and allowed the morning to continue opening. He did not think about forgiveness. He did not think about letting go. Those words felt too large for him. He only thought about setting something down that he had been carrying for far too long. Not all of it, just a little, enough to breathe more easily. The first light of day touched the floor. He let the moment happen without adding thought. The anger was still there, but for the first time, it was no longer standing at the center. And in that very small shift, Grandpa Ellis felt a real kind of tiredness. The tiredness of someone who is finally close to resting. Not the exhaustion of someone who must keep bracing. Grandpa Ellis remained by the window as the light grew clearer. The morning brought nothing new, only continued in its familiar way. He noticed that when he did not replay the old story in his mind, the room felt slightly more spacious. Not because there was more space, but because fewer things were taking up room. He tried setting the anger down, not through a big decision, but through a very small movement. Simply by not mentioning that person one more time this morning. Simply by not calling the name. What surprised him was that when he did not call it, the anger did not rise up. It did not protest. It simply rested there, like something tired from being carried for too many years. Grandpa Ellis stood up and stepped outside into the yard. Each step was slow but steady. His body was no longer young, yet it no longer needed to brace itself to hold something unnecessary. He realized that all this time, anger had not made him stronger. It had only worn him down, quietly and gradually. And that quiet exhaustion was finally enough to make him not want to carry any more. He looked up at the pale morning sky. There were no signs of anything special. No formal forgiveness. No clear sense of release. Only an ordinary morning with just a little less weight. And for him, that was already enough. When he went back inside, Grandpa Ellis felt that he did not need to tell that story again. At least, not today. Not because he was afraid, but because it was no longer necessary. The story had finished its work a long time ago. Keeping it only made him more tired. He placed a hand over his chest again, and this time, the heaviness had eased slightly. Not gone, just lighter. He sat down in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. No praying, no reflecting, just resting. And in that very real rest, Grandpa Ellis allowed the new day to continue. Without carrying the person who had once hurt him, without carrying the anger that had completed its task long ago. Letting go does not always come from deep understanding or great compassion. Sometimes it comes from the honest exhaustion of carrying anger for too long. When we realize that anger no longer protects anything and no longer teaches us something new, we begin to ask a simple question. Why am I still holding this? Buddhism does not require us to forgive in order to find peace. It gently reminds us that continuing to punish ourselves with old anger does not change the past when the other person has already left. Anger is only working on one person, ourselves. And when we are tired enough to stop punishing ourselves, letting go becomes a very natural choice. Letting go in this case is not about making peace with someone else. It is about allowing ourselves to rest. Resting from carrying something that has long expired. When we stop telling the story every day, anger loses its place on its own, without needing to be pushed away. Tonight, if you feel tired from carrying a very old anger, you do not need to solve it. Simply ask whether you still have the strength to keep carrying it. And if the answer is no, you may gently set it down, allowing the body to rest and letting sleep arrive like a kind reward for that tiredness. Lydia makes lanterns after night has fallen. She prefers that time to daylight, not because the light is weaker, but because everything around her has settled. In her small workshop, there is only the soft sound of metal touching metal, the faint rustle of thin paper being gently stretched. Lydia has done this work for many years, long enough that her hands know each step without needing much thought. There is one lantern she still remembers very clearly, not because it was beautiful, but because of how she felt while making it. It was an evening when she entered the workshop filled with anger. Not the kind that explodes, but the sharp, simmering kind that makes every movement faster than usual. Lydia didn't notice it right away. She only felt an urge to finish quickly, to make the light brighter, clearer, as if something needed to be proven. When the lantern was finished, it was indeed bright. Its light was strong and white, direct and sharp, with little softness. When lit in a dark room, it revealed everything immediately. But it was uncomfortable to look at for long. Lydia once thought it was a good lantern. Brightness seemed enough. But over time, she noticed that no one chose to keep that lantern hanging in their home for very long. Each time she looked at it again, Lydia remembered how she had felt while making it. The anger had entered every fold, every cut, quietly and invisibly, but unmistakably present. She began to understand that things created from anger often carry that same energy. No matter how beautiful their form may be. The lanterns Lydia made on calmer evenings were entirely different. Their light was not as strong, but it was warm. They did not shine far, but they were enough to keep a room from feeling dark. Lydia never compared the two kinds of lanterns with words, only with the feeling of standing near them. One made her want to stay, the other made her want to turn away. Tonight, Lydia stood at her work table and did nothing at all. She held a thin sheet of paper and felt its softness. Inside her, there was a trace of irritation left over from a long day. Not much, but enough that if she began working, the light would turn harsh again. Lydia noticed this early, and this time, she did not force herself to continue. She set the paper down, dimmed the lights, and sat quietly for a while. She did not send the anger away. She simply did not allow it to be used as fuel. Lydia understood that not every moment is meant for creating something. There are times when it is better to let the materials rest. Let the hands rest. Let the light wait. Outside, a few old lanterns hanging under the eaves swayed gently in the wind. Their light was soft, not competing with the darkness. Lydia watched them, and in that moment, she realized that light does not need to defeat darkness to have value. It only needs to be gentle enough not to hurt the eyes that look at it. She stood up and put her tools back in their places. No new lantern was made that night, but Lydia did not feel a lack. In that choosing not to create, there was a deep kind of rest. And the anger, when it was not used to make light, began to weaken. Not because it was extinguished, but because it no longer had anywhere to go. Lydia remained in the workshop for a long while, doing nothing more. The remaining low light was enough to see the shapes of things, but not strong enough to cast sharp shadows. She noticed that when she did not try to create new light, the room did not become darker at all. Instead, everything felt more comfortable, no longer exposed too clearly. She reached out and touched the old lantern made during that angry evening years ago. Its light was still strong, still white, still unchanged. But Lydia no longer blamed the lantern. It was simply an honest result of who she had been in that moment. Looking at it now, she felt no anger, only a gentle reminder that whatever enters the hands will eventually come out as light. Lydia hung that lantern in a corner where fewer people passed by, not to hide it and not to display it, just to place it where it did not need to shine too much. The other lanterns, made on calmer evenings, remained in the places where people like to sit and linger. There was no sense of right or wrong, only of what fit. Outside the doorway, the wind moved softly. The gentler lights swayed with it, not harsh, not competing. Lydia stood there, watching the light move very slowly, as if relearning how to breathe. She realized that anger does not disappear the moment we recognize it, but when we do not use it to create anything further, it begins to withdraw on its own, no longer spreading outward. She turned off the lights in the workshop. The darkness was not frightening as she once thought. It was simply the pause between one lighting and the next. Lydia closed the door very softly. She carried no lantern with her. She carried no anger with her. Only the feeling that the day had been enough. What is created in anger often carries that same energy. No matter how beautiful or correct the form may appear, light born from anger can be very strong and very clear, but it is rarely warm. It illuminates, but it does not invite. And over time, it tires the eyes. Buddhism does not teach us to extinguish anger the moment it appears. It simply reminds us that we do not need to use it as fuel. When we do not allow anger to enter our actions, our words, or our decisions, it gradually loses its strength, not because it is fought against, but because it is no longer being continued. Letting go in this case is not about making anger disappear. It is about not creating anything more from it. When we allow ourselves to wait, to rest, and to not light the lamp just yet, anger weakens naturally, like a fire that is no longer fed with wood. Tonight, if you notice a light inside you that feels too harsh, you do not need to fix it. Simply dim it. Darkness is not the enemy. Sometimes it is the gentle dark that allows the mind to rest and lets sleep arrive very softly. Uncle Reed had walked that road many times, not because it was beautiful, but because it was familiar. The narrow path ran alongside an old field where he had once made a choice that he later learned to blame himself for. Each time he walked there, the memory returned. Not loudly, but steadily, like a whisper that didn't need to be heard by anyone else. Back then, Uncle Reed believed he had done the right thing, or at least the necessary thing for that moment. But as time passed, the outcome became clearer, and his anger slowly turned inward, not as an outburst, but as a quiet, lasting irritation, a form of self-judgment that required no outside witness. He had grown used to speaking heavy words to himself in his own mind. No one heard them. No one argued back. Those words repeated each time he remembered the road. If only I had chosen differently. If only I had seen further ahead. If only I had not decided that way. The questions no longer searched for answers. They existed only to keep the irritation alive. Uncle Reed stopped by the side of the road and looked out over the silent field. The wind moved gently, carrying no blame. He noticed that the field did not return to the day the seeds were planted. It simply stood there with what it had become. The thought passed through him, but it was not yet enough to make him feel lighter. Being angry with oneself is a stubborn habit, especially when no one interrupts it. For a long time, Uncle Reed believed that if he punished himself long enough, he would never repeat the same mistake, as if inner punishment were necessary. But the years went by, and he saw that it did not make him better. It only made him more tired. His body reacted before his thoughts fully formed. His shoulders sagged. His steps grew heavy, as if each time he walked this road, he had to carry a sentence that had never been lifted. He sat down on a low stone and breathed out slowly, not to calm himself, but because his body needed rest. In that moment, Uncle Reed suddenly realized that no one else was judging him anymore. The people who had once been involved had gone on with their lives. Only he remained, continuing to play both the accuser and the accused, inside a trial that never ended. This realization did not bring immediate relief. It simply made him stop. Stop adding one more heavy sentence to himself. And in that very brief pause, a small space appeared. Not enough to call peace, just enough to prevent more weight from being added. Uncle Reed stood up and continued walking. The road was the same. It promised nothing new. But his steps were slower now, more even. Not because he had forgiven himself, but because he was beginning to feel tired of continuing the punishment. And in that tiredness, a very small possibility opened. The possibility of treating himself a little less harshly. The wind passed over the field again. Uncle Reed did not chase any thoughts. He simply walked, letting the road move beneath his feet. The old story was still there, but for the first time, it was no longer shouting. It walked beside him quietly, like someone who had spoken for too long and was finally running out of words. Uncle Reed slowed his pace as the road began to narrow. There were fewer footprints now. Only low grass and earth pressed firm by time. He realized that he had walked this road long enough to know every bend. Yet he had never walked it without carrying self-blame. Today, that blame had not disappeared. It had only grown quieter, like a voice that had spoken too much and was beginning to lose its strength. He stopped, not because his legs were tired, but because his heart was, for the first time, he allowed himself to admit something very simple. He had done the best he could at that time. Not the perfect thing, not the most correct thing, just what he was able to do with the understanding and capacity he had then. The thought did not bring a great release. It only meant he did not need to say one more heavy sentence to himself. Uncle Reed sat down again and rested his hands on his knees. His hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from weariness. He realized that being angry with oneself is also a quiet form of violence. It leaves no visible wounds, yet it wears a person down day after day, and no one can endure that forever. Even when the one causing the harm and the one receiving it are the same person. The wind moved across the field, carrying the familiar scent of soil. Uncle Reed breathed in, not deeply, just enough to feel the air enter. His breath moved out more slowly, more naturally. In that moment, he did not fix the past, and he did not offer himself a grand forgiveness. He simply stopped striking himself one more time. When he stood up, his steps felt just a little lighter, not because the weight was fully set down, but because he was no longer adding to it. The road still stretched ahead, promising nothing new. But Uncle Reed continued without needing to keep his head lowered as before. He walked on, with his tiredness acknowledged, and a small measure of gentleness toward himself. he left the old road as the light began to fade. He did not look back. There was no need. Some roads only need to be walked long enough for us to realize that we no longer have to keep punishing ourselves. Being angry with oneself for too long is a form of inner violence. It is quiet, easy to overlook, yet it consumes a great deal of life energy. When we judge past choices using the knowledge of the present, we forget that we once did not have what we have now. Buddhism does not ask us to erase every mistake. It reminds us that continuing to strike ourselves with the past does not improve the present. Letting go, in this case, is not about forgiving ourselves all at once, but about stopping the punishment. When we pause and choose not to say one more harsh sentence to ourselves, a small space appears, enough for the breath to move through. Letting go also does not mean denying responsibility. It means allowing ourselves to learn and then continue living without carrying a lifelong sentence. When we no longer stand in both roles, judge and accused, the mind begins to find a place to rest. Tonight, if you notice yourself speaking very heavy words to yourself, you do not need to turn them gentle right away. Simply stop before saying one more. Sometimes that not speaking is already enough for the mind to feel a little lighter, and for sleep to arrive like a well-earned rest. Master Solon was rarely asked many questions, not because he was distant, but because when people were near him, the need to ask slowly faded. He sat with an ease that felt natural, as if his presence did not need to be used for anything more. In the small room where he lived, the light was always gentle, with no clear source and no sharp edge. No one knew whether he preferred light or darkness, because he never chose one over the other. One afternoon, when the clouds were low and the wind moved slowly, Master Solon opened the window and allowed pale light to enter the room. The light did not push the darkness away. It simply appeared quietly, and the darkness retreated on its own to corners where it was no longer needed. He watched this, not to draw a lesson, but to notice that no argument was taking place. Many people came to Master Solon carrying stories of their anger. They spoke with tired voices, as if they had been arguing for too long, not only with others, but with the darkness inside themselves. Master Solon did not tell them to win. He did not say that the darkness was wrong. He simply sat there, like the soft light in the room, not questioning, not opposing, not trying to prove anything. Once someone told him they had tried very hard to push anger away, but it kept returning. Master Solon looked at them, then looked toward the window, where the light was changing very slowly. He did not answer right away. When he spoke, it was only one small sentence, without command. Light does not need to defeat darkness in order to be present. The person fell silent, not because they understood immediately, but because the sentence did not demand understanding. It simply existed, like the light in the room, needing no explanation. Master Solon knew that when we argue with the darkness inside us, we unknowingly give it a great deal of energy. Each objection, each attempt to prove ourselves right, calls the darkness by name once more. He had seen this in himself long ago. When he was younger, he believed that to find peace, he needed to push everything unbright out of his mind. But the more he pushed, the more tired he became. Only when he stopped trying to fix and stopped trying to win did light appear on its own. Not because darkness disappeared, but because he was no longer standing in its way. Master Solon placed his hand on the wooden table. The hand did nothing. It simply rested there. He noticed that when there was no need to prove anything, the body softened naturally. The breath moved through without resistance. And in that lack of resistance, there was a gentle kind of brightness. Not the light of answers, but the light of no longer needing more questions. Outside, the clouds drifted slowly and low. The light shifted little by little, without announcement. Master Solon did not follow it. He knew that light arrives when there is enough space, without needing an invitation. Darkness does the same. Both are natural movements, requiring no judgment. He closed his eyes for a moment, not to meditate deeply, but simply to rest. In that rest, there was no darkness to push away, and no light to hold on to. Only a very simple presence, like a room when no one is trying to turn the lights on or off. Master Solon remained seated as the light in the room shifted once again. There was no clear moment marking the change. Only darkness easing back naturally, as if it had never been pushed at all. He noticed that when no one steps in to argue, everything seems to know how to find its own place. The visitor who had been there earlier was still sitting quietly. No more questions. No resistance. The anger they carried had not disappeared, but it no longer filled the entire room. It stayed there as a small shaded area, neither illuminated nor chased away. And because of that, it no longer needed to grow. Master Solon did not say anything further. He knew there are things that only need to be seen, not explained. The light in the room was not doing anything. It was simply there. And in that presence, darkness no longer had a role to oppose. When the visitor stood up to leave, Master Solon did not walk them to the door. Not out of coldness, but because there was nothing to conclude. The door opened, then closed very softly. The light in the room remained the same, neither brighter nor dimmer, continuing in its own way. He rose slowly and stepped closer to the window. Outside, the day was leaning toward evening. The light was no longer clear, yet it had not vanished. It blended into the space, becoming part of the coming night. Master Solon looked on without naming it, not calling it day, not calling it night, just a very gentle movement. In that moment, he understood that peace does not come from removing darkness, but from no longer standing as its judge. When there is no need to prove oneself right, light naturally finds a place to appear. Not harsh, not victorious, just enough that there is no longer a need to argue with oneself. He closed his eyes and allowed the room to return to its natural quiet, not holding on to light, not fearing darkness. And in that absence of choosing, everything became very light, as if it had finally been allowed to rest. Anger and pain often grow stronger, not because they are too large, but because we spend so much energy fighting them. Each argument, each attempt to prove ourselves, places us in opposition giving darkness another reason to remain. Buddhism does not teach us to push darkness out of the mind. It gently reminds us that light does not need to win in order to be present. When we stop arguing with what is already here inside us, the mind opens into a space that is wide enough. And in that space, light arrives naturally, without invitation. Letting go in this case is not about giving up or surrendering. It is about no longer acting as a constant judge. When we stop trying to fix everything into correctness, things begin to return to their own quiet order. Tonight, if you feel tired from struggling with your own emotions, you do not need to win. Simply stop arguing. Sometimes that very absence of conflict is where the gentlest light appears, and where sleep arrives without needing any further reason. Leora does not appear the way people usually imagine a spirit. There is no bright glow, no clear shape. Leora exists simply as the gentle feeling that arises when you look up at the night sky and realize the moon is still there, no matter how thick the clouds may be. People do not see Leora. They only sense that presence, steady and calm. On some nights, the sky turns restless. Clouds move in quickly, covering the moon. The thunder is not loud, the rain not heavy, yet it is enough to stir unease in those below. On nights like these, Leora is still there, not avoiding the storm, and not trying to pass through it. The moon does not leave its place. It simply allows the clouds to pass. Leora softly whispers to those who are still awake when the night has grown very deep. Not through words, but through a delicate knowing. The moon does not remember stormy nights. When the clouds drift away, the moon remains full in its own way, carrying no trace of wind, holding no echo of thunder. Not because the moon is stronger than the storm, but because it does not need to hold on to anything that has already passed. Someone looks up at the sky on a night like this. Inside them live old anger and pain that once felt fierce. They believe that if they do not hold on to those memories, they will forget what happened. Leora does not disagree. Leora does not agree. She simply lets the person look at the moon for a while. As the clouds slow and thin, moonlight returns little by little. not suddenly, not as a victory, just as a natural appearance. The person realizes that the moon carries none of the shape of the clouds that once covered it. The storm leaves no mark on the light. And in that moment, a very quiet question arises. If the moon does not keep the storm, why must the heart keep anger? The aura does not answer that question. The moon does not answer. The moon simply continues to be there, shining gently. It does not demand understanding. It does not ask anyone to let go. It only remains present, enough for the one who looks to realize that some things do not need to be carried in order for life to continue. The night deepens. The person lies down. Old memories still nearby, but no longer needing to be held tightly. Like clouds that still exist in the sky, yet no longer cover it completely. The moon does not hurry. It knows the clouds will pass, not because the moon does anything, but because clouds do not stay forever. Leora dissolves back into the sky, leaving no trace behind. There is no need to remember her, no need to call her name. The moon remains quietly in place, doing the only thing it has ever done, offering light, then gently giving way to morning, without carrying the night with it. And in that dissolving, there is a whisper so soft it is not meant to teach, only to lull. The mind can be like the moon as well. It does not need to hold the storm to know it has passed through a long night. Pain and anger are often held because we fear that if we release them, they will return and make us weak. But like clouds in the sky, emotions come and go according to their own nature. When we do not cling to them or repeatedly call them by name, they may not disappear immediately, but they also lose their reason to stay. Buddhism does not ask us to become luminous like the moon or to overcome every storm. It gently reminds us that the moon does not need to remember storms in order to keep shining. The mind is the same. When it no longer grips old anger, it naturally finds its light again. Not because it has won, but because it is no longer carrying unnecessary weight. Letting go at its deepest level is not an action. It is a quiet release. When the hand grows tired, it opens on its own. When the mind becomes weary, it lightens naturally. No forcing, no promises, only allowing things to pass. As clouds pass across the moon, tonight, if echoes of old storms still move within you, you do not need to chase them away. Just remember that the moon within you does not need to carry clouds in order to keep shining. And in that gentle remembering, sleep can arrive. Light as moonlight, settling softly into the night. Let your breath cool and clear, like mountain air drifting down a high path. Soften your forehead, your eyes, your jaw. Let your shoulders drop like snow settling on quiet ground. Arms, wrists, fingers, loosening. Chest, belly, opening like cold air, making space inside your lung. Hips, thighs, knees, feet, all falling into deep stillness. Now imagine a soft white glow sliding down the mountainside. Calm, slow, steady. It reaches you, touches your shoulders, your breath, and tells you you can rest now. Let that cool glow quiet the day inside you until your chest feels wide and your mind feels open like a high valley. Let your awareness rise as if carried upward by thin mountain air, past the cliffs, past the quiet peaks, into the wide night sky. Stars like tiny sparks hanging in cool darkness. Everything widening. Everything fading into gentle height. Thank you for closing your day in this calm space. Let sleep come like night falling over the mountains. Soft, slow, certain. And if you want to return to this high, quiet again. You can follow the Sleepy Zen channel so we can meet in this wide stillness each night. Sleep well. Sleep well.